Yeah, so as I've already said, Dr. Roo is a palliative physician and the founder of Ori Kalankini, an organization that's changing narratives around menstruation and sexuality in India. Sneha provides basic training in palliative care to health professionals and starts conversations around death and dying through death cafes. She has hosted 27 death cafes around India and is currently involved in making a documentary video on people in the LGBTQIA
ନାଟ
community and
ନାଖ
the end of
ତାପରେ
life
ଦୁପୁର
care.
ବେଲା ଭରେ ଶୋଇଛି
Uh,
ଦୁପୁର ବେଲା ପରେ ଥିଲି ଖାଇଛି
Hello, Dr. Roo, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody else, I would request you repeatedly to please keep your microphones off because, as you can understand, this session is being live streamed on YouTube, on Facebook, and it will be uploaded on YouTube later on. So please do keep your microphones muted because it's very difficult for us to understand each other and hear each other over other noises and so on and so forth. As I was saying, Dr. Roo has hosted 27 health death cafes across India and is currently involved in making a documentary video on people in the LGBTQIA community and the end of life care. Uh, she has kindly agreed to do a session with the Queer Studies Research Cluster where we are going to interview her and she's going to answer a bunch of our questions. So I hope that this becomes a pleasant session and I hope you all enjoy it. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Roo. One of the first questions that I would like to ask you as a physician active in the queer community and also in the medical establishment, what are the primary issues you would like to flag about the medical establishment's reaction to queerness?
Right. For people who don't know, I would like to also come out again, like that, like everyday process. So I am a bisexual woman, and I am also a palliative physician. So I have, connection with both the queer community and the medical community. Uh, the question is relevant on many fronts because one, what the medical community thinks of queer people is almost like the other. So nobody from the medical community can be queer. They've never heard or they've never found made a space so comfortable so that doctors can start coming out. It's not possible that there are no queer doctors. And when I came out, it was very late. Like, I'm 32 now. I came out to the medical community when I was 28. So I was pretty established. Or rather, like, I was more like not insecure. I was not an intern. I was not at the hands of anybody. So it was comfortable for me to come out. But the first reaction was still that, how is this possible? You look normal. So that has been one towards their own people, like to doctors itself. There is no space for queer people to come out, or very less space. I wouldn't say no space, but very little space. And when we come, like, if I have to step into the shoe of a medical practitioner and then talk what I've observed about queer people accessing healthcare, it has been very less.
Right.
I'm a palliative physician. I take care of people who are chronically ill and who are at the end of their lives. I mostly work in a cancer hospital.
Right.
I asked them, did you, because I didn't know the Telugu word for queer. Then I asked them particularly about people who identify as transgender people.
Right.
And they all started laughing, like my staff started laughing. And then I realized, wow, like I felt unsafe, that, oh, they don't respect trans people. They might not even respect me, you know. Then we spoke about it. Like, I came out to them and I spoke about it. So I explained the whole spectrum to them. Then I asked them, how many people from the LGBTQIA plus community have enrolled as patients, and they couldn't find. Some 5 years back, there were two people who came to the ward, accessed the care, were supposed to stay longer because they had to take radiation, but left within 2 days. And the staff themselves agreed, almost confessed that, yeah, it was very weird for us, and we did laugh at them. um, so I think it is at multiple levels. One, within the community, within the medical profession, they don't make it easy for doctors to come out. Second, I think if people from the queer community are accessing medical care less, that means something is wrong. And in the further questions, I think we can talk more about what is, but at straight plain level, that लोग आते नहीं हैं, तो क्योंकि हम
Right.
comfortable नहीं बनाते उनको आने के लिए.
Right. Since you were kind enough to divulge about the fact that you are a bisexual woman, this is a question that we discussed even within the cluster when we were talking about inviting you. What is your opinion on the current discourse that a lot of people in a very patronizing but otherwise with perhaps their hearts in their right places, but still in a very patronizing way, tell us that everybody is a little bi, everybody is a little bisexual.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question, because this brings the um, issue of bisexuality and its erasure. Um, Everybody is not bi, and
Exactly.
women are not bi. Um, I I didn't know that I was bisexual till I was 26. Like I had heterosexual relationships. I was with a man. I had penovaginal sex, and only later did I discover this. That I experienced life as a bisexual person. Or
Right.
one more thing happens is you know when we say that everyone is bisexual, everyone, I wouldn't even say everyone is bi curious.
Right.
Not everyone wants to experiment with all genders. But still, I would like to bring the word bi curious and how different it is from a person who's bisexual.
Right.
um, it is a inner knowing, and just like how I don't get, a gay person does not get attracted to women, how a lesbian does not get attracted to a man,
Right.
bisexual people have very clear preferences. So it's not at all a phase, and we are not confused. And many times we hear, like, bisexual people hear that, come on, take a stand, choose. I don't think we should choose, because we are attracted to our gender and other genders. So I think it's very inhuman, and especially coming from people within the LGBTQIA community. It is, you don't expect it. You think that you, being a marginalized group, will understand. But I have experienced this more strongly than from heterosexual people. Like, heterosexual people, you kind of expect them to know, but within the LGBTQIA community, when it comes to dating, like, you ask
Right.
anybody, they're very scared about dating bisexual people. Somehow bisexuality equals promiscuity.
Right.
So
Uh,
that's really disturbing. Yeah.
One of the issues that I have faced as a bisexual person, a bisexual woman, is that I'm become very invisible. I pass very easily as a straight woman because the way I perform femininity is very conventional.
Mm.
Because I have been with men, so it's very easy for people to identify me as straight and as a straight ally who talks too much about queer issues. When, to be honest, I am queer myself.
Yeah.
So, have you ever had any dilemma like that? Like,
Yeah, thank you, Ekabali. And sorry that, this happened to you. And sorry that it's happening even now as we speak to so many bisexual people. Um, it has happened, and sometimes, like, once I went to this queer event, and they, like, one person even asked me that, you don't look queer. I said, I'm sorry, like, what can I do? I don't look
oh,
queer. I don't fit into stereotypes.
exactly.
So even queer is, how strongly, or how, yeah, I don't know. Also, the straight passing, the word I have, when you say that you're straight passing, you're negating my experience as a bisexual person. Even tomorrow, if I choose to marry a man and be in a, a relation, in a committed monogamous relationship with a man,
I
that
would
will not
still
be
be a
stopped.
bi person. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's very true. That's incredibly true. Thanks for pointing that out.
even Duti Gopi Chand.
I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah, she the sports person, who came out. But when we spoke to her, she's a bi person, and the
Right.
media reports her as lesbian. So yeah,
Okay, that's just another
yeah,
example of bi erasure that we see face on a regular basis. Uh, and if you go back, going back to the topic again, the advertised topic of the talk, what are the specific problems related to queer aging that you listen to during your experience as a doctor as well as a community member and worker?
yeah. Um, with aging, I would like to bring both my experience by listening to people in queer, like Rainbow Colored Death Cafe,
Right.
and also doing the literature review of what I have studied in preparation to it, is that many people go back to the closet
All right.
when they're aging, as they become physically dependent on other people, um, and especially if they have an ailment and they're brought back to their family of birth, then many people go back to their closet, and it's very heartbreaking. Apart from that, like few studies even show that lesbian women undergo lesser number of mammograms, um, while compared to heterosexual women.
Right.
Um, Certain diseases are more prevalent in among queer people, and I would like to highlight on few. One is the instance of substance abuse is higher, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts and tendencies is higher among queer people
Right.
as a result of the marginalization by the
Right.
community. It's not that we inherently have addictive genes or something, but we have to cope with the pain of marginalization. And that's why I think our community is more susceptible to these ailments. And as we age, it only increases, like loneliness only increases. And I also, I'm sure all of us here have experienced that the dating community is very small among the
Exactly.
queer community, and how haphazard it is. Like everybody is everybody else's ex in a way, you know. So also, long-term committed relationships are more uh, unlikely. Uh, not because we are inherently promiscuous, again because the number is less, so social conditions are contrary. So isolation, depression, anxiety, and people taking care of each other becomes very less. So I think these are very specific problems related to aging if we talk about.
Right. Uh, Also, since you work with Ori Kalankini, Ori Kalankini deals with menstrual health. So,
Yeah.
how do you navigate menstruation in the queer context where it is a privilege for so many of us cis women?
Yeah, exactly. I think if somebody asks me what is the biggest myth of menstruation, I would not take out any taboo, but tell that biggest myth of menstruation is that only women menstruate.
Right.
You open any sanitary pad ad, they're only women, and pack any, packing also, it's like flower, petal, butterflies, um, and the whole development sector also keeps telling women and girls, but it is complete erasure of experiences of non-binary people, of trans men.
Exactly.
And also it means, in a way you're equating womanhood to menstruation. So even cis women who don't menstruate does not mean that they're less of a woman, or not complete woman.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're perpetuating another kind of stigma and shame. uh, Ori Kalankini aims to be a trans inclusive organization. Like we have a offshoot called Bloody Inclusive,
Right.
where we are, eventually will try to create products also which are trans and non-binary inclusive. Right now, we have a podcast
Right.
where trans people can speak to each other, not even me.
Right.
Like just two trans people or two non-binary people make a phone call, talk about menstruation dysphoria, and give us the recording. Two things happen. One, that they know that they are not the only one, and they get someone to talk to, because otherwise, it's a dysphoric subject, so they
Right.
won't talk. So one, they get a chance to talk, they get a chance to empathize, and second, the cis community, which has to be educated, gets a chance to listen to the trans experience. And
Right.
these calls can be anonymous. So right now we are there, and yeah, it's very dysphoric. So we are not able to go ahead, like go ahead and do, because, and it's not fair also as a cis woman, for me
Right.
to overtake the movement. So I'm just waiting for a trans man or a non-binary person to step in and help me out with this.
Right.
Yeah.
I wish you all the best with that work. You're also the host of Death Cafe, and as part of your work with Death Cafe, how do you see concerns about dying amongst queer people differ from concerns about dying among straight people?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I wrote a paper on concerns about death and dying among among the terminally ill in Hyderabad.
Right.
So it was a paper done in a hospice where 16 people were interviewed. That's all, and there I found few words repeating, like concern about their loans that they have taken, about the children, concern about parents, or certain guilt around not having
Right.
lived well. When and these are almost similar even in death cafes.
Right.
So usually it's about, okay, who's going to take care of me? I wish I'm not dependent. I wish I die alone, or my family is there. So there are two preferences. When it came to rainbow colored death cafe or queer people, the concerns are very different. Like, I'll tell you how. Many of them, and I would add myself to it, I worried that most likely I'm going to die alone. Like, who's going to be with me, around me? And then also the concern was about being sent back to the parental home, because family is not a safe place for many of us in the queer community. Um, Another concern was being dependent,
Right.
being and very strong one was about being disrespected, or being discriminated against by the medical community or by fellow patients. Suppose they are admitted in a ward. So, so these are very strong and real concerns. Many people express that they would rather die than, be humiliated in the hospital. Few other concerns were their partners.
Right.
Will my partner be treated like my partner and given medical information with respect? Will my partner and my parents clash? Will my friends be allowed to see me
Right.
when during my end stage? And like I already mentioned, going back to the closet, many people were like, many people just broke down and said, I fought all my life to, be who I am. And then
Right.
again, when I'm frail and when I'm dependent on someone, I don't want to battle this battle along with my medical condition. Yeah, these were very strong. I remember one more. This was a trans person. He said that he was concerned about where his body will be buried, because sex assigned at birth is
Right.
different. And then that's really disturbing to think, because after that you don't even have control.
Right.
So yeah, so these are very, very different and very strong concerns I've heard of.
Thank you for that honest and enlightening answer. I was also wondering that since the queer discourse in India is increasingly moving towards the demand for civil liberties, how do you see the possibility of health insurance for queer couples? Since we were talking about partnerhood and how that would impact the relationship with the parents,
Yeah.
so marriage and health insurance and ownership of property and how these are reflected in death. How do you address that question, or what are your experiences regarding that?
Yes, in fact, I have helped one queer person. Right now, living will or advance directives, as it's called, is not legal in India. It's not a legally bound document.
Right.
So I just facilitate conversations among people and their partners and their family with respect to their, how, almost like a medical will. That if I become unconscious at any point in time, these are the treatments I want, or these only these many days, please keep me in the ICU.
Right.
Certain agreements they have within themselves.
Right.
And the issue of property came up once. Like I had an opportunity to do that part of it once, and they had to do it like friends. Like the person had to not give any special relationship status to their partner,
Right.
and make a will just as if I'm giving it to this particular person. So I think it will make a lot of difference if civil rights have are given, uh, like you said, from health insurance to taking loans together
Right.
to joint accounts, joint property, and definitely will, how property is given, and if they're recognized as equal as in marriage. So I don't know, my stance on marriage is not clear, but on, like, for example, Uttarakhand High Court, I think it gave permission that same sex couples can live together, but
Right.
after that it has not spoken more. But I think these conversations will lead us a long way, and we have to keep pushing for it.
Exactly. I think that is one of the first. If there are two laws that we desperately need, one is for civil liberties and the other is for queer sexual abuse. These are two laws that we most certainly need as soon as possible, right after decriminalization. And it's been almost 2 year, 1.5, about to be 2 years since decriminalization, and we still haven't gotten those. And that's something that we are working towards as part of the community. Keeping all of that in mind, and keeping the pressures that queer people feel, how do you address the question of inclusive palliative care? And also, since the medical community is so hell-bent on telling us that we treat everyone equally, uh, rather than equally, do you think it would make more sense if they treated all of us sensitively? uh,
Yeah,
is-
yeah. Yeah, thank you. I want to add 2 points with the previous question, and then I'll come to this.
right.
I was thinking, yes, there are those two laws which you mentioned, but I also think we have to. There can be policy changes, like very small policy, not small, but there can be policy changes which may not be laws per se, because laws will take very long time. For example, what I'm meaning is medical education.
Right.
Though 377 has been scrapped, but our textbooks have not changed. Like, the sodomy is still a criminal offense. It's coming under forensic science.
Right.
Uh, Things like that. There is no chapter on transgender health per se,
Right.
and only endocrinologists know about the transitioning, which I think should be under general practitioners' knowledge also.
Right.
Uh, because many people in the community are self-medicating.
Right.
If a person with no medical background can self-medicate, it's better for a general practitioner to be able to guide them. They're
Right.
self-medicating because they
Right.
don't have guidance. So I think these small changes also have to be brought out. Now, coming to the how do you make palliative care more inclusive? And thank you for restricting it to palliative care, because that's under my scope and I can talk about that.
Right.
Though, what, once what happened, in fact, it happened in Tejpur. I
Right.
went to Tejpur and I was interviewing trans women about what do you want, like, what are your concerns around end of life care, and
Right.
what do you think about disease then and everything. At the end, she said, you know what, whole life I've been discriminated, whole life you didn't treat me well. Like, she was
Right.
addressing me as a medical
Right.
practitioner, and almost talking to the whole community through me. She said, whole life you have not cared for me. I couldn't come to the hospital because I was not feeling safe. What difference does it make if you treat me well at the end of the life? And I was so taken aback. I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, I'm doing my bit, but the whole practice needs to change. And I just wanted to voice her concern here because I think she told me with some confidence that her voice will reach different platform, and that's why I think I want to share it here. And
Right.
now coming to palliative care, for me it becomes important because I personally feel that the state of mind one has when they expire,
Right.
when they leave this life, when they leave their body, it's
Right.
almost like a completion time, no?
Right.
So that's why I want to make sure we treat people as people, at least in palliative care, because palliative care promises, palliative care promises that we will give person centered care, not pathology centered care. So it's even if five people are suffering from breast cancer,
Right.
it will be, X, Y, Z. Each of them will be treated according to their personhood, their
Right.
aspirations, their goals, their dreams. So I think I can place, I mean, that's why I joined palliative care, and I think I have a right to place that expectation on palliative care, you know.
Right.
Um, so, what does it mean to make palliative care inclusive? I would say, let's start with structures first.
Right.
So, structures would be when a person enters the hospice, that
Right.
is, a facility where end of life we are talking about, or even if we say palliative care center, need not be end of life, but chronic illness. When a person enters the building, do they have any signs to know that they are welcome? I'm not saying put a rainbow flag, but in your form, can you put that, okay, this hospital or this facility is an inclusive place. Any discrimination against, minorities and LGBTQ people will not be tolerated.
Right.
That seeing one particular thing in the form will give me a lot of confidence.
Right.
You know, same in the form if there are mention of not only male, female, but male, female, other, and
Right.
dash. One
Right.
person can identify themselves how they want. If
Right.
in the form instead of wife or husband,
Right.
usually it is father's name or husband, but it's otherwise it's can we make it partners, because
Right.
not everybody is married, or spouse. So these small changes, and that is in terms of the structure.
Right.
Second, when we talk about the system and the staff,
Right.
so can we train the staff to address people by their right pronouns?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right, and with their preferred names, like their documents can have any name, but one small question, that how would you like me to address you, what name is your name of choice, that can make a person really feel welcome. I think these are very basic things which healthcare professionals can easily inculcate. No need to be extra anything, but just basic human decency of calling the person by their preferred name, not by their dead name, by their preferred pronouns. And I think basic training program, like Galaxy Magazine had a petition that all the influencers on YouTube
Right.
should be given a course on gender sexuality training. So I think healthcare professionals should surely be given a course on gender sexuality, because one, it is decriminalized,
Right.
and like you,
Exactly.
yeah, people will access it more, and ideally should access it more, and if they're not accessing, something's wrong. So it should be part of their, this is one of the policy changes I was mentioning.
Right.
These trainings should be made mandatory, and the changes in the form which I suggested can be easily implemented. So these are few things which can make palliative care inclusive. And second, which you asked rightly,
Right.
um, I have been advocating for queer inclusive palliative care. It used to so happen, I'll tell you two incidences.
Right.
One, there's a WhatsApp group of all the palliative care physicians in India,
Right.
and I would post something related to, okay, one new guideline has come around how to make palliative care LGBTQ friendly in Australia, for example. That
Right.
message would be just ignored, and then they'll continue the previous conversation or add something else. So
Right.
where making it unacknowledged, that is very common. What's happening. And second thing, like you mentioned in my bio, I spent last 2.5 years traveling in different parts of India and training people in palliative care.
Right.
That included, like, I purposely went to medical colleges and I went to teaching institutions,
Mm-hmm.
so that a large number of people can be reached out.
Right.
In many places, I was asked to change my topic. They said, "Ma'am, can we speak about communication? This is very uncomfortable." And this was after 377 has been scrapped, you know. So then I just had to refuse. So I said, "I'm sorry, like, I won't take any sessions." And like then they were very sorry and apologetic,
Right.
but already the disrespect was done. Like I
Right.
knew I was not welcome, you know. Just because I'm a doctor, they're asking me to change the topic. Had I gone as a patient, then I knew what treatment I would get, you know.
Right.
So it's very scary. But yeah, so I think it does not work when they say we treat everyone equally. One, they cannot. If you call
Right.
me by my dead name, you're not being equal to me. You're not treating me equally, because other people you're treating like a human, and me you're not treating like a human.
Right.
You're not treating equally. It's not possible. And I think we have, as health professions, both psychiatry, psychology, and mainstream allopathic medicine for the body,
Right.
has done a lot of disservice to the queer community for ages,
Right.
um, by in terms of discrimination, in terms of, like I mentioned, how their textbook is designed.
Right.
What we did came under criminal offense, even if it was consensual. Um, so I think r- making amends is necessary. I spoke to one queer affirmative health, mental health practitioner, and she said that now we can't be neutral. Being neutral will be an offense. We have to be affirmative. We
Exactly.
have to step ahead and welcome people who are queer, because for so long we have kept them apart. And also, when we say that we are treating equally, we are putting the onus of being comfortable on the patient, on the queer
Exactly.
patient, who is
Exactly.
first of all queer and marginalized in different places in the society, and then also a patient suffering from a health condition. So for them it takes 3 4 more steps to access medical care
Right.
than a heterosexual person. So I think we have to be queer affirmative. We have to take 3 steps from our side, and that is what it will take, uh, to make palliative care inclusive.
Since we were talking about palliative care and queerness, I was wondering, since the great moment in which queer activism sort of blossoms in India is in the early 90s with the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I was wondering if you have had to deal with patients who are struggling with AIDS or are HIV positive, and how are those patients treated within the medical establishment?
Um, I have not treated anybody with HIV/AIDS, though it comes under palliative care because it's
Right.
chronic illness and end of life care also comes. But like I was enrolled in a cancer hospital, so mostly people with cancer I'm treating. But I would like to give like raise my voice so that people who are taking HIV medications can step into palliative care facility also,
Right.
which will give them absolutely painless end of life, and even before that, the quality of life
Mhm.
which palliative care offers.
Right.
I'm talking as a palliative physician here, and I know how much difference good palliative care can make. you know the team will talk to your family, make many things easier, and even there's something called setting the goal of care.
Right.
So okay, right now you can't do these things, but what else would you like to do? Setting ourselves with small goals that can increase the quality of life, that can increase hope and expectancy, and how much juice we take out of life. So I
Right.
would request people to opt for palliative care, and at the same time, um, I would say that there is a lot of untapped potential that palliative care has in terms of HIV. HIV has been really abused by the NGO sector.
Right.
Um, we and initially it was just cis people taking up these causes because they got funds for HIV.
Right.
And yeah, I would love it if movement, and it's starting also, it's already started. So movement from the community regarding HIV/AIDS. Now ask for better treatment. Okay, you wanted an ART, you got ART. You wanted good treatment, you got good treatment. Now probably ask for high quality palliative care. And I tell you that it's like government, like any institution is like an establishment, and it follows the same rule. Until the demand is there, people
Right.
will not make changes. So I think we should start requesting for high quality palliative care in terms of HIV also.
Do you think that will happen eventually? For example, the first or second generation of queer activists who started agitating in the early 90s, they have not reached that age, and nor have we, where we are 60, 70, and we are about to experience death. So, do you think it's also a question of time?
Yes, it will. It is question of time, but I'm I'm trying to say that, this is another misconception about palliative care, and it's not like, it's very common
Right,
that palliative care is end of life care. Palliative care is both chronic illness and end of life care. So you don't
right,
have to be dying to access palliative care. So
right.
even if you're diagnosed today, you
Uh-huh.
can still ask for high quality palliative care. And I think somewhere in our community, we have our immediate battles to fight.
Right,
So we are not looking at what is possible. And I have the fortune of being in palliative care and seeing what difference it can make to, how a person feels about their body, how they pass away, or how they're taking care of themselves for next 15 years, 17 years of dealing with
right.
cancer, or in this case it can be HIV/AIDS. So it's like someone inside is telling you, look, it's very good, ask for it. So I think we should not wait for time and ask for it.
Right. Since we were talking about AIDS, and there is so little awareness, there is no sex education in this country at all, very little sex education in private schools also, and absolutely none when it comes to dealing with queerness. So, if you were to talk about safe sex measures amongst queer partners, which may or may not relate to penovaginal sex, what would be some issues that you would flag?
Um, like I don't I really don't like talking about this, but I will vouch for dental dams.
Right.
Please use them, they're really great. And when you rightly, like you said, that even when it is sex education, quote unquote, it is penovaginal sex, and it kinds of makes the queer kid in the room
Right.
feel that they're not, that they're not normal, because what is spoken as normal is only penovaginal sex. So I think we
Right.
need to change. And you don't need to be a sex educator to do it. Like for example, in Uri Kalankini, we talk about menstruation ideally,
Right.
but then when I draw the vulva, I
Right.
talk about clitoris, then I talk about penis, then I talk about intersex. That I use this as an avenue to start talking about the difference between sex and gender. I don't go deep, but then I plant the seed enough
Right.
for them. And I think also in sex education, pleasure activism is very important. Like
Absolutely.
we look at queer sex only in terms of age sometimes.
Right.
Mm. So, putting even our consciousness, our attention on what practices can increase my pleasure,
Right.
mm, is a very good conversation to have. Like, yeah, one is STIs and safety, uh, and on the other hand is this. I think we should also talk about this.
That is actually very enlightening. And I was wondering, like, if you had to talk, if you had to start the conversation around pleasure, like, what would you use as an entry point?
Um, I will ask participants in this call what makes, like, which are the favorite parts of your own body. Second question, what gives you pleasure? Like, And third question, have you communicated about this to your partner?
Right.
And if you are not able to communicate, and it's super hard because we've always told to give more than get, and especially cis women um, are trained to give more.
Mm.
So asking for something, and especially something like pleasure,
Right.
can be a big taboo. But I think small conversations just within the partnership itself can come a long way. I would just ask, I would start with this, Ekabali. It would be like, okay, you know, what makes me feel good?
Right.
Am I aware of that, and am I able to receive that? Like, I might feel good if someone goes down on me, but I might not be able to receive that. Like when someone's doing, I'll be like, okay, okay, stop, 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 it's enough, because I don't have the tolerance to take that much.
Right.
So I think safety is the container in which pleasure can come.
Right.
So we, in partnerships, we need to focus on creating that safety and safe space where the tolerance to even take pleasure is possible.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating way of putting it across. And since we were talking about your about personal experiences and testimonies and so on, you're creating a documentary series, and would you talk about it slightly in greater detail?
Right. So initially it was like a documentary film. And then I realized how much work it is, and I don't have so much expertise. So we thought that to convert it into docu-series, where if you're interested, you can mail me. I can share my email ID later. So the procedure is, we have a set of 5, 6 questions around, what are your concerns around end of life. What do you want to tell your medical practitioner? What did you wish that your family knew about you that they don't know currently? It's like a voice or a video legacy which you're leaving for people you care about, and talking about issues that matter to you regarding death and dying, or even ill health, chronic ill health, death and dying. I think it will be on that spectrum. 5 questions. Anybody who's interested can video record this. And if you don't want your face to be seen, you can just video record with your voice and the objects in your house, so that you're not seen, but a part of you is still there in the video. And the collection of these series will be strung together and played at Indian Association of Palliative Care. They have a yearly conference, and I think I want to present our voices to them, because how much ever, me as a physician is advocating, it's just like it's like an activism I'm doing. So I want them to know that they are real people with real concerns about their ill health and their death, and they don't trust you. I think it's very important for them to know that it's not me being angry, but it's about people not really trusting them, and they need to change, and they're happy to change, but they didn't get a chance to listen, I think. So that's what the project is about.
Would you kindly share the questionnaire with us so that we
Yeah.
can possibly work on it later? And I would really ask the audience to come up with their questions and so on. So if any of you have any questions, please raise your hand, leave a comment in the chat, and we'll unmute you and like ask a question to Dr. Ru.
My pronouns are she and her.
Right.
Everybody. Yeah.
It's always difficult for the first question to come in. I have seen this repeatedly with Facebook chats and lives and so on. People take a bit of time for them to gear up and ask that first question.
Yeah.
So
Sai has raised the hand.
Yeah.
yeah, sure, sure. Go
Uh,
ahead.
Thank you, Ekabali, for organizing. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you, Ekabali, for organizing this, and thank you, Dr. Ru, for sharing your work and your life with us. I wanted to bring up 2 questions. One is, since you're talking about palliative care, how do you see the role of, like us as queer or non-binary people as also caregivers? Because this has been one of my very deeply personal experiences where, like often queer people get invisibilized as those who will always remain single, because
Yeah.
our relationships and our friendships are never really recognized as legible units, and therefore we are not supposed, therefore if one is single then one is always available, so by default you're often become the sole caregivers for aging parents who are often chronically ill. And that raises a lot of specific concerns, right? For instance, for a non-binary person who is taking their mother to a cancer hospital, they have to dress accordingly so that it doesn't create more extra mental health, like more difficulties for the mother who is already in so much pain, right? So yeah, if you could talk about any experiences that you've had around this very specific concern with care. And secondly, the other question that I wanted to ask was, like, since you spoke about pleasure, I've been thinking about, again, like related to the first, like this idea of being single, being misread, like what does it mean for pleasure in times of COVID, where we are constantly asked not to touch, right? Like touch has become that very lethal weapon, and this whole idea of physical distancing. And so if one is not in a coupled, recognized coupled arrangement, then it becomes even more difficult to be able to access pleasure, unless we are just only talking about self pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for such wonderful questions. First, with regard to your first question, I think it was not really okay. It was a question in that you asked that have I seen any non-binary people show up as caregivers? No, I haven't. And it's a shame that I haven't, because that means somebody is not coming to the hospital fearing discrimination. And India being a society where the neighbor will come, bringing the person. I'm assuming that if a person is non-binary or trans, or not fitting into the gender norms uh, in any way, they would delegate the task to somebody else, which is a shame, because they are missing out a chance to hear important information. So you have pointed it out rightly yourself, and me not seeing cases like this, cases of people like you and me. I'm not non-binary, but like people from the community not accessing or not coming to the hospital is a shame, and it is telling us something. So that is the answer, that we lack conditions which make people feel safe. Second, with respect to pleasure and COVID, I don't have answer. um, Self pleasure is the only answer I have, and it's a very genuine concern. Because what if you're not married, and then even accessing, suppose I have a girlfriend, then I still cannot go to her house because she has old parents, and I might be a carrier. And I think these are difficult times where one has to keep to self pleasure or other forms of sexual expressions online in a safe way. So yeah, I, I didn't have answer to either of them, but they still were answering in some way. I wanted to add one more point with regarding to caregiver. Is one, you rightly mentioned that there is the relationship between aging parents and the person from the queer community being the child. There's also an example which I think we didn't speak about before, is about a queer person losing their partners. And especially when we talk about death and dying, suicide is very, very common among us. And recently we had um, I had lost my friend Anjana. Then 16-year-old boy also committed suicide in Bareilly, whose name we won't take. um, there is an aspect of disenfranchised grief, because my relationship is not legally accepted, or the society doesn't see it as valuable enough, or doesn't give certain social standing or respect, or the family didn't know about me, for example, me being a partner. But that does not stop my grief from existing. And me, like, my access to bereavement care or support, which a heterosexual couple or a heterosexual in a heterosexual relationship, the other girlfriend, the boyfriend might have, um,
Right.
that is also lost. So I think that point I wanted to bring because of your question. Thank you for bringing the question up.
Thank you.
Achla Pahwa, sorry about the pronunciation. Achla is telling us not a question but a comment, and she thanks you for the session, which was informative and enlightening. And as an educator, would take forward the concerns in my class and try to educate those around me. And more power to you.
Thank you.
And I think Olipriya has raised her hand, their hand, and would Olipriya?
Ma'am, thank you for recognizing me, I suppose. Ma'am, I'm in class 12 right now, and we were studying the Freud psychosexual theories. And as none of us, majority of us, have never had any kind of sexual education, the differentiation of genital pleasure or sexual pleasure is difficult for most of us. And the exposition to the Freud's theory before a proper sex ed is also something that's not very recommended because of the cons of it.
Right.
So, ma'am, do you think there are any ways that we can actually, like, open our own, perhaps, sex education places where the students can actually get, once interested, at least can get like a proper education based on it?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And there are one or two organizations. One is Agents of Ishq, that they have a very strong, it's not sex education as such, but still conversations around sex pleasure, sexuality is happening in a non-threatening way. And a lot of teenagers are accessing that, both heterosexual and not. But if we want to formalize a structure, I think it would be a great idea to take ahead.
Absolutely. I think she's got a pretty good idea. And depending on where you're based, if you're based in Kolkata, I can give you contacts of people in Calcutta itself who do that kind of work. I think Sneha Roy Chaudhary has another question. Sneha?
Also, we should come up with something like online,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
accessible to
Absolutely.
everybody. Yeah.
Sneha, I think, has a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were just talking about grief in terms of losing partners. And I was reminded of this documentary that was made on Thomas Bridegroom in the States, which was talked about a lot because of his partner not being able to, access his body after he passed away, and not being able to grieve or go to the funeral because parents didn't receive uh, the partner well, etc. So my question is, of course, a lot of this is legal because, again, it's about accessing your partner's body in terms of legal, power of attorney, etc. But I would just like to know what, if any, attitude exists towards a relationship like this in the medical community in terms of accessing information about your partner's health in hospitals, etc. And how, if at all, the medical community discusses it or addresses it, or should there be some kind of a discussion in the medical community about this overall?
Yeah, clearly there should be. And that's the very strong need. And, many of us are advocating for it. There is one doctor, Samira, she's a trans person and she's an intensivist. Even she's working, I'm working. There are a few more people. Right now, as you can imagine, it doesn't exist. Unless, like, few queer friends have chosen palliative care, and that means only they have come to us at end of life, and then we had a meeting where we called the parents and the queer folks together, during the last stage, like really that final coming out and final acceptance thing happened, and then a kind of peace was established where the parents respected the partners, but still, I think even in that one case which I have worked with, it still was the person's body, and what happened to the body after it was, I mean, came under the parents' uh, I don't know what to call it, parents' area. So the partner could get as close as being around till the person expired, but after that, they didn't come to the funeral, and yeah, I don't know if that was a personal choice or not, but yeah, this is one thing which I have facilitated, and this is what happened. Unless the person is completely estranged from the family and they don't know about it, or they don't want to do anything about it, it's very difficult, I think, as of now, uh, to talk in terms of, what happens to the person's body, and yeah.
Right.
Very sad state, yeah.
Yeah.
And it becomes all the more important for us to ask now, because we are bringing all these up.
Absolutely. I think also important because of COVID, and there is hardly any register, hardly any way of finding out how many queer people are dying due to COVID, or how many queer people are ending up in ICU due to COVID. So I think it's an important conversation, even more so to have, because we are living right in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
I'm very glad that these questions are coming up, because most of the times it was me, one queer person in the queer community, talking about death and dying. Uh, it would be like, oh yeah, you're a spoiler. You're just spoiling the mood.
the queer
Yeah.
killjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we have a lot of queer killjoys with us today, and if any of them have any questions, we would be delighted to answer them. I think Achla has a question. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah,
Uh,
hello.
so I wanted to ask that. So firstly, I wanted to hear this because I am not very educated about the concerns and how marginalized people feel. So this was really an a very insightful session, and actually very introspective for me to go into uh, the practices which have been held. So I wanted to ask you that media, because media plays a very important role in everything, education and everything, with movies coming, Shubh Mangal Zada Savdhan. So what was your take on that, on that idea of the movie, or was it, do you think that would make any difference, or it will just pass on like any other movie?
I have not watched Shubh Mangal Savdhan, but I watched Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga, and I think people who watched it will know what I'm talking about. That it was such a poor representation, and it did disservice. It made such a hue and cry about it, but at least it should have been that strong. It's not. At the same time, there are other movies which are not mainstream, but still media takes on queer issues, and with queer protagonists shown respectfully. I think because of that we have to give credit to the media. Mm, Having said that, also I would like to draw attention towards reporting films and say popular TV series, web series. Of course we need more representation and better representation. I think it's changing, but still we have a long way to go, and I think there are better people to talk about that, who are more well versed in films. And but I would like to again point fingers, or even move our attention towards reporting of issues with respect to queer people, queer people's death. For example, when Anjana Harish expired, It was very disrespectful how her death was reported. There were many right-wing groups which brought out brought out things like, oh, she was a decent Hindu girl, and then she got into this urban Naxalite group, and then this happened with her. So it was very insensitively done. Okay, we expected from them. Even the so-called mainstream media, for example, when reporting, they asked for guardianship of her friends, like, because what had happened, if you know about Anjana Harish's Facebook live, which she gave few months before her dying of suicide. she uh, she spoke about, it can be triggering for somebody, because for many people I'm going to talk about violence and forced medication. So please mute the conversation for some time if you feel that you cannot take this information, because it was for me. So she made a Facebook live about how she was forced to take medication, how the doctor hit her, and there was, she described the whole conversion therapy process. After 2 weeks of coming, and she said that nothing of Anjana Harish is left. Very very little thing of Anjana Harish is left now. Um, After 2 weeks of getting discharged from the facility, she left home, and then her parents filed missing persons complaint. Then she came in front of the magistrate and represented herself, and then it was in her favor, like her parents were asked, because she was an adult, to go away. Then she went to Goa, lived with her friends or in the hostel, either of the two, and then died of suicide. But when the people reported it, they asked that, they almost reported like friends who were her guardians, or something like that, because she was an adult woman, she didn't need guardian. So taking the agency away from an adult individual uh, is a very, you know disrespectful way of reporting. And we even, simple things like committed suicide vis-a-vis dying of suicide, you commit a crime, this we know. So yeah, I think even reporting queer issues, and how many articles do you see are about queer people being successful? Um, and even then, if you see, they'll be already established names who are highlighted again and again. Even when we are talking about panel discussion, being called to panels. So it's the same set of queer people who appear in all panels, be it online social media we're talking about, or be it on TV media we're talking, TV as a media outlet we're talking about, or even print media. So in print media, the reportage is shabby. I'm talking about this one particular incident with Anjana Harish, and there are many more than that. Just that my attention went now, my eyes opened now. But this has been happening, and many people have been fighting for it for a long time. So that is one thing. Uh, and like I mentioned, even calling different people in different platforms should be encouraged. And third, to 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 make our articles more than crimes or suicides. We have lives other than being queer people. So reporting us as full, like people with multiple identities and our whole life, I think that also should be brought in front.
Absolutely, and that is something I've also faced as a survivor of sexual violence myself, and as a feminist activist. And I'm always seen in that lens, with that lens, that this woman's going to come and shout and scream at people and
Yeah.
make a lot of things very difficult for a lot of men. But I'm also a person who has their life and who likes to hang out with friends and eat junk food and make pointless jokes about things generally about the world. So I think to a certain degree that social reality is so it's so tilted against us, it's so rigged against us, that they don't that it's almost like they don't see the humanity in us anymore. They see us in terms of stereotypes, in terms of what we do in public life. And I think that's something that queer people, and indeed people from all marginalities, face, especially if they're vocal about it. So yeah, I think I don't think there are any more questions, are there?
Achala asked one in the chat, I think.
I
Mm.
um,
do you find hypocrisy among people being supporters of LGBTQIA plus on social media solely and not being supportive in real life solution? You answered it yourself, but I also want to tell that it's not easy. Mm, Probably they have some price to pay if they are seen, um, seen supporting or seen with. So I will still I will give them benefit of doubt unless they're outright abusive, threatening, discriminatory, harmful. But yeah, this is so true, Achla, that this happens, and I think my remark came out of अब क्या कर सकते हैं kind, but होता है. But really, what will you do? How can you force someone to support or be open? I think it's also we put a kind of pressure on people to come out, and we also put a kind of pressure on people to openly support. Sometimes I would say we can aim, like if there are any allies on this call, even if you can't openly support an LGBTQIA plus person, uh, I'll say try it, but take your time. It's okay, but at least support them whenever they face microaggression. Even helping them with their work and helping them cope with microaggression, being their support system, even if I'm invisible, I think would be one step. It is still like we need more, but I think I would say personally, from my view, I think I would give them benefit of doubt. How much accessibility of last rites tradition according to religion? Uh, Sorry.
Juicy for queer people.
Oh, it depends on religion to religion, and I'm not expert on religion, so I think I won't comment on this. Like I have many other reasons to be killed.
I think with your point about LGBTQ people and how some people are not really very supportive, claim to be supportive, but in real life you never find them when you need them. I think there's this block amongst people in our previous generation, in our parents' generation, that they say that, yeah, okay, we don't mind this, as long as this is somebody else's children being gay, or someone else's children being trans or bi, or bi non-binary, but as long as as long as it's not our own children, or as long as it's not somebody in my family. And I have personally seen this in a lot of people. I don't know how many of you might have witnessed this. Hello?
Hi, am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So
I was just commenting about how people say that they are supportive, or otherwise they don't have a problem with LGBTQIA people, but as long as it's not in their family, or as long as it's not in their own kids. It's a particular issue
yeah,
that you see in our parents' generation.
yeah, true.
And I'm not sure how many other people might have experienced the same. Uh, I don't see any more questions coming. Uh,
I think we can.
I can't hold on. Shreyoshi is saying that she can't find the option to raise her hand and would like to clarify a question. Clarify the question. Yes, Shreyoshi, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, when I asked about the last rites tradition, I don't mean according to religion. I wanted to ask, like, how much accessibility does the queer people have to last rite traditions, or are they denied last rite traditions?
I think it's more common for trans people to be denied last rites traditions than cis people. Tradition, but my experience is little limited. So
Could you repeat that, because I think your video kind of freezed in the middle of it.
Okay, so I was saying that my experience is limited, and when we talk about last rites being denied
Right.
to people, it is more for trans people
Right.
than cis people among the queer community also, because yeah, and also people who are estranged from their families. So I
Right.
think in a way it's, you know, how it is supposed to be had they been non-queer is different.
I see. Um, are there any other questions and hands? No, I don't see any other questions, but thank you for that wonderful talk and that wonderful, very informative and engaging session. I would
Thank you
really,
for
really,
inviting me. And thank you everyone for being such engaging audience. It was really good to talk to you all.
thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for putting up with us for so long. And I would really, really request you to send us the questionnaire so that we can sort of circulate and send all our concerns about dying whenever that might be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sneha Roo. Delighted to have you
Thank
again.
you. Yeah.
Uh,
And I would like, can I say something
yeah, of course.
regard to Death Cafe? Um, almost every Sunday we have Death Cafe, where you can just come and talk about death, dying, your concerns about the dying, and also get chance to listen to what other people say. Um, yeah, so you're invited, and both Ekabali and Shreyoshi have access to my email ID.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I had fun too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.